Let me first start out by saying it might not be what some of you guys were expecting. I mean, the G9 2nd gen isn't necessarily an upgrade over the 1st gen. It probably isn't the kind of upgrade you imagine, with better, higher performance form. For those of you who already own the 1st generation G9, the 2nd gen might even feel like a downgrade in some ways. Today, let me clear up all the confusion and curiosity in one video. I started this channel to review Chinese running products. More importantly, it's my way of forcing myself to practice spoken English. I'm self-sponsored and money doesn't grow on trees. Whether good or bad, I'm going to give you my honest take, with no filters. Let's start with some facts and numbers. My size 45, the original G9, weighs 189 grams. The G9 2nd gen is a size 46. It runs small, so I had to go up a full size. It weighs 195 grams. In stack height, the midsole on the 2nd gen is 2 mm thinner than the original. That's a really important difference, and a major source of disappointment for people who bought the 2nd generation because they loved the first one, whether on Chinese social media or among friends I know. Also, there is no sock liner in the 2nd gen at all. You can even see some of the stitching where the upper is connected to the midsole. That's my personal complaint, but let's keep the comparison going for now. On the outsole, both have almost the full coverage rubber and has ultra-thin CPU rubber, which is also highly durable with great traction. I felt like I had plenty of grip, and I wasn't really worried about the grip on these shoes at all. You can see that to offset the weight added by the slightly wider platform on the 2nd gen, Anta cut out sections in the midsole and outsole. Seems like it really tried to cut weight even further. There is no doubt the G9 series was designed to be an ultra-light racer, one that's also durable. But from the comparison we just did, it's pretty clear that the 2nd gen didn't really push the weight lower, especially after removing the sock liner and cutting out part of the midsole. That was somewhat unexpected. For me, since I have mild flat feet on my left foot, my strike or my mechanic is slightly different from my right. I push off a bit more inward, a bit more toward the medial side. That stitching lines like this start to feel irritating after about 14 kilometers. I had a similar issue with the BMAI 3.0 Turbo, which also had no sock liner. My solution was to wear thick, high-cushioned socks, which delayed the rubbing quite a bit. However, the upper on the G9 2nd made it uncomfortable for me to run in thick socks. If you have the Adidas Adios Pro 4 or Takumi Sen 11, the biggest complaint about those two Adidas shoes is poor breathability. I really think it's a shame Anta didn't stick with the 1st gen's upper. That one had great breathability, great fit, and was super comfortable. The 2nd gen's upper is more friendly for wide foot runners, more room, so that's an improvement. Alright, let's wrap up the differences. The stack height looks similar, but the sidewall is higher on the 2nd gen, while the actual midsole is 2 mm thinner. The carbon plate in the 2nd is easier to bend and more flexible, but you lose a little bit of proportion in exchange. The 2nd gen has a slightly wider platform for better stability. Weight is almost identical between the two. The upper is less breathable but has a wider toe box. The 2nd gen has no sock liner, and whether the stitching line bothers you depends on the person. Now that we've covered the specs, let's talk about how they run. I mentioned in some videos that the Anta and Adidas source their midsole foam from the same Chinese company. That's why the G9 shoes and the Adios Pro 3 and Pro 4 feel similar in a lot of ways. Basically, the first gen G9 and the Adios Pro 3 are in the same family of ride sensation. It feels like a denser midsole. It's more of a slightly gentle sinking, but I still feel a lot of propulsion from it. It's not a sink and bounce sensation. You don't really sink into this foam, but I feel the speediness, a really smooth roll forward from this shoe. The G9 second gen rides much like the foam in the Adios Pro 4. It definitely has a more squishy foam with a lot of movement to it. It's more dynamic compared to the G9 first gen, a lot more compression and decompression. It's really bouncy and responsive, but also very soft to land on. In terms of impact coming up from the road, it's more protective. One thing I should make clear, I'm not saying the G9 first gen is exactly the Adios Pro 3, or that the second gen G9 is the Adios Pro 4. In terms of overall performance, the original G9 is like a slightly enhanced Adios Pro 3, or a lower threshold doing PB Pro. The second G9, maybe because of the lower stack height, doesn't reach the level of Adios Pro 4. It's more like something between the Adios Pro 4 and the Takumi Sen 11. Now, let me talk about the paces I ran in these shoes and how I felt at each pace, which I think will help explain them better. At my daily paces, I felt like the second G9 was a great shoe that didn't make me have to work, and I could just kind of zone out. It's easier to compress compared to the first gen, especially when I roll back on the heel a little bit. It's pretty forgiving. The first gen, that midsole foam doesn't sink down as much at those paces. It holds firmer, but that's not to say the first gen wasn't fantastic at those paces, because they've changed the rocker profile of these two shoes. The first gen has a continuous curve from heel to toe. No matter when I land, it's buttery smooth, smoother than the second gen. When I picked up the pace and did threshold repeats, or efforts closer to VO2 max intensity, that's where the first gen G9 felt most exciting. At that pace, I'm putting more into the ground, and it felt like the shoe was giving more back to me. I felt like I was getting a bit more power for what I was putting in. The drawback for me with the G9 second gen is also related to the changed rocker profile. Basically, at the midway point, around where the pads of your foot are, that's where it starts to curl up. When I run faster, when I start using my toes more, I feel like I'm missing the best part of the shoe. There is less foam under my toes. This is what I meant at the beginning. For runners who really loved the first gen G9, the second gen might feel like a downgrade rather than an upgrade. If you are an efficient runner with a strong push-off, and if you like denser and more foam under your pads and your toes, the first gen is definitely the better choice. I will say that when you are really trying to push the pace and maintain a hard pace, it's stable and it's fast. I think it's an effective shoe for those days when you want to do faster running, when you want to do reps on the road, or maybe a tempo run. I feel like the second gen G9 is more about lowering the barrier to entry and being more accessible to a lot of us average runners. You get the most out of it if you land more toward the midfoot and the heel, the back of the shoe. It's more dynamic, a really big amount of compression in that part with a really nice bounce back sensation. The original G9 is undoubtedly an excellent shoe. Is the second gen G9? I think that depends on your preference and how you look at it. If you think of it as Anta's Takumi Sen or Anta's Vaporfly, then yeah, it's also a fantastic shoe. Quite frankly, if Anta had clearly positioned the second gen G9 at launch, there wouldn't have been as many complaints on Chinese social media. And look at the latest colorway of the G9 second gen. Anta changed the upper to a more breathable one and gave us back the sock liner. So, from Anta's own actions, you can tell Those complaints were all legitimate gripes. Alright, that's all I've got for today. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions about these shoes or tips for improving my English speaking. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. I'll be bringing you more on Chinese running products. Follow if you are interested. And hope you have a good one.